Hello, and welcome back to Getting Started with PHP Microservices. In this section, we'll be creating our environment for microservices. And we're going to start with an overview and setup of Jenkins, which is going to help us automate testing, code quality, and building. We're then going to compare and contrast unit, integration, functional, and spec-based testing, and start to form our opinions as to what would be the most appropriate testing for this microservice. We're going to write and run some of our first tests for the microservice. We're going to then take it a step further and produce a deployable artifact, and that's going to culminate in our ability to push that artifact to some type of repository where we'll be able to install it on a host and run some functional testing. A setup of Jenkins. Quick roadmap of what we'll learn. We're going to start with an overview of Jenkins, what it is, and specifically what we're going to use it for. Then I'm going to direct you where you can download and install Jenkins to set it up locally, or run it somewhere in the cloud if you desire. Then we're going to walk through some plugins which we're going to use with Jenkins that are more specific towards PHP, and we will definitely use them with our project. And then we're going to actually set up our project that we created in section 1. And then finally we'll do a quick peer ahead into what's next. Quickly, Jenkins is a multi-purpose automation tool. Originally, I think it was created to do for the continuous integration movement. It was used for automated testing and building. It was actually called Hudson at one point in time. It has grown over time. It's used for many different things, deployment pipelines, cron, like a single cron host, source of truth, many different things. But what we're going to use it for specifically for this lesson and project is to do 3 things. We're going to do static code analysis. We're going to use it to run automated testing. And we're finally going to use it to build a deployable artifact. All right, quickly to install Jenkins, I suggest you go to jenkins.io/download. Okay, here it is, jenkins.io/download. You can see there's many different ways you can run it. You can run it as a Docker container. You can run it in any distribution of Linux as well as Windows. I personally just install it locally on my Linux machine since I have access to one. But there's many different ways for you to run Jenkins so you have access to it. Okay, for the plugins, we're going to use jenkins-php.org as kind of a template starter to help us out. But we're going to need some support via local libraries that we're going to install through Composer. I've listed them here. You can go to packages.org to actually find more information about them. I recommend using Composer require --dev in order to install them as part of the application. It just makes it more portable. The other option is to install them globally. Then every project will be able to use it, but the end result, though, is especially if you're releasing something that's going to be widely distributed or open source, you want it to be as portable as possible. And there are many plugins for Jenkins to install. I've listed them all out here. If you go to the website. Okay, for our Jenkins plugins here, we have this site, jenkins-php.org, which has a lot of nice integration between Jenkins and PHP. You can actually see it goes through and says, here are the plugins. It names everything out, has links to all of it. It actually also lists a Jenkins CLI method in which you can install these plugins through the command line, which makes things pretty easy to do. Otherwise, you can go into Jenkins directly. This is, manage Jenkins, the plugin manager. And you can kind of go through and scroll through and see there's a whole bunch of different plugins for Jenkins. There's a filter at the top too, so you can filter things down. But it might be easier to do as a setup to just use this, download this jar CLI tool to use this in order to do some mass installation of the Jenkins stuff. Okay, now we're on to our project to set up and config. Okay, here I am back in Jenkins. I'm in my wine collection ImageMagick project that I created. Basically, I named it this. ImageMagick manage, which is this microservice, will be a portion of the wine collection application. So I just kind of put it together to keep things organized. The next thing you do is you can set up some basic setup stuff. The first thing is, I like to discard old builds just to keep things from piling up. It's more like a garbage collection type of thing. So basically I just say only keep the last 15 builds. Anything beyond that's going to be ancient history. Next, you set up your source code management. Best practice, everybody should be using source code management. I'm using Git. So you can actually set your repository URL and set your credentials, which are stored in Jenkins for that repository. You can specify a branch. So if you want to eventually set a project, for instance, to pull release branches or pull other branches to do verification testing and whatnot, you are able to. And then as far as the build trigger, I pull the SCM every 15 minutes. Basically, if there's any changes in the source code, it will pull it and kick off the build process. You can actually do it. The other popular way is trigger build remotely. So for instance, you could put like some type of hook in your Git commit, which would actually call a URL back into Jenkins to say, hey, don't pull me because I'll tell you every time that I get a commit and I'll call this URL and then you can run. And from there, you start setting up your build environment. So for me, I like to delete the workspace before build starts. That's just to keep things clean and pristine. I don't want any lingering artifacts that are, maybe causing unnecessary noise or disruption to my build because, it could make your builds work when it shouldn't work and vice versa. So it's just best to start with a clean slate. I also want to abort the build if it's stuck. If it goes more than 3 minutes, you can set it to whatever's makes sense for your project, but I don't want it to just go continuously. And also, a few other things like I use secret text in files. I'll get into that. I add timestamps to the console output. That just makes it easier to read through the console output. The secrets, this is based on we went through this earlier about passing storing some of our environmental data in Jenkins for the purpose of doing our unit testing and integration testing. So you can see here, I go through all my bindings. So I basically bind a secret to a environmental variable, and then Jenkins actually takes care of setting those environmental variables for me. And then the actual build steps. So this is where we get into the actual build. Since the image manage is a directory within a wine collection project in my source control setup, the first thing I do is I do a push D, which is essentially a CD, into image manage. And then I do a composer install. So this basically will install all my composer dependencies based on the composer.lock file. And then I go in and I do a set plus X. This basically forces the environmental variables to pull into my system. All those environmental variables I set. Again, I do a push D into image manage, and then I do an ant, and I call the full build target. And basically this will go through and it will do the static code analysis. It will do the lint. And it will do the integration and unit testing for PHP unit. Okay. And at the very end, my post-build actions, basically this is where I, basically report into some of these plugins for reporting. So like my check style results, I say this is where these check style results should be. And this is based on how I set things up in my build.xml file for ant. So in ant, I tell it to force the output file to go here. For my code analysis, for PMD analysis, I force it to go here, et cetera, et cetera. So I basically just tell Jenkins where it should be able to find the files, and then Jenkins feeds those files into the correct plugin in order to generate all those nice graphs for me. So that is the project setup. So in this video, we installed Jenkins. We got some more tools installed via Composer. We added Jenkins plugins that are going to basically be able to show nice views or make use of those tools we installed via Composer. And finally, we put in a kind of template or initial starting point for our project in Jenkins. We'll continue to evolve that configuration as we go.